Class, this is Ms. Andakis. I'm here to read you a little bit of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. We were midway through Chapter 8 before spring break. Just to jog your memory, they're at the Quidditch World Cup. It is Bulgaria versus Ireland, and currently things are getting very heated. We have the referee Mustafa, who's been distracted by the Vila, the Bulgarian mascots. You remember are very pretty-looking women who dance and sing and make the men lose their minds. And then we've got the Irish mascots, which are leprechauns, and that throw leprechaun gold down into the stands. So I'm just going to start mid-chapter, and if you have questions about what happened before, you can just leave a comment on Google Classroom. So, play now reached a level of ferocity beyond anything they had seen yet. The beaters on both sides were acting without mercy. Volkov and Volkanot in particular did not seem to care whether their clubs made contact with their bludger or human. As they swung them violently through the air, Dimitrov shot straight at Moran, who had the quaffle, nearly knocking her off her broom. "Foul!" roared the Irish supporters as one, as standing up in a great wave of green. "Foul!" echoed Ludo Bagman's magically magnified voice. "Dimitrov skins Moran, deliberately flying to collide there, and it's got to be another penalty. Yes, there's the whistle." The leprechauns had risen into their air again, and this time they formed a giant hand, which was making a very rude sign across the pitch towards the Vila. At this, the Vila lost control. They launched themselves across the pitch and began throwing what seemed to be handfuls of fire at the leprechauns. Watching through his omnioculars, Harry saw that they didn't look remotely beautiful now. On the contrary, their faces were elongating into sharp, cruel, beak-like birds, and long, scaly wings were bursting from their shoulders. Here's a picture of the Quidditch players. Sorry that my cat is making a cameo there in the background. You can get up. Sorry, she's just going to annoy me otherwise. "And that, boys," yelled Mr. Weasley over the tumult of the crowd below, "is why you should never go for looks alone." The Ministry wizards were flooding onto the field to separate the Vila and the leprechauns, but with little success. Meanwhile, the pitched battle below was nothing to the one above. Harry turned this way and that, staring through his omnioculars as the quaffle changed hands with the speed of a bullet. "Levesky, Dimitrov, Moran, Troy, Mullet, Ivana, Moran again, Moran scores!" But the cheers of the Irish supporters were barely heard over the shrieks of the Vila, and blasts now issuing from the Ministry members' wands, and the furious roars of the Bulgarians. The game recommenced immediately. Now Levesky had the quaffle, now Dimitrov. The Irish beater Quigley swung heavily at a passing bludger, and hit it as hard as possible towards Crumb, who did not duck quickly enough, and it hit him hard in the face. There was a deafening groan from the crowd. Crumb's nose looked broken, and there was blood everywhere. But Hassan Mustafa didn't blow his whistle. He had become distracted, and Harry couldn't blame him. One of the Vila had thrown a handful of fire and set his broomtail alight. Harry wanted someone to realize that Crumb was injured. Even though he was supporting Ireland, Crumb was the most exciting player on the pitch. Ron obviously felt the same. "Time out! Oh, come on, he can't play like that. Look at him!" "Look at Lynch!" Harry yelled. For the Irish seeker had suddenly gone into a dive, and Harry was quite sure that this was no Wonsky feint. This was the real thing. "He's seen the snitch!" Harry shouted. "He's seen it! Look at him go!" Half the crowd seemed to have realized what was happening. The Irish supporters rose in great wave of green, screaming their seeker on. But Crumb was on his tail. How could he see where he was going? Harry had no idea. There were flecks of blood flying through the air behind him. But he was drawing level with Lynch now, and the pair of them hurtled towards the ground again. "They're going to crash!" shrieked Hermione. "No, they're not," roared Ron. "Lynch is," yelled Harry. And he was right. For the second time, Lynch hit the ground with tremendous force, and immediately stampeded by the herd of angry Vila. "The snitch! Where's the snitch?" bellowed Charlie along the row. "He's got it! Crumb's got it! It's all over!" shouted Harry. Crumb, his red robe shining with blood from his nose, was rising gently into the air, his fist held high, a glint of gold in his hand. The scoreboard was flashing, Bulgaria 160, Ireland 170, across the crowd, who didn't seem to have realized what had happened. Then, slowly, as though a great jumbo jet was revving up, the rumbling from Ireland's supporters grew louder and louder and erupted into screams of delight. "Ireland win!" shouted Bagman, who, like the Irish, seemed to have been taken aback by the sudden end of the match. "Crumb gets the snitch, but Ireland win! Good Lord, I don't think any of us were expecting that." "What did he catch the snitch for?" Ron bellowed, as he jumped up and down, applauding with his hands over his head. "He ended it when Ireland were 160 points ahead, the idiot!" "He knew they were never going to catch up," Harry shouted back all over the noise, also applauding loudly. "The Irish chasers were too good, and he wanted to end it on his terms, that's all." Come on, Sky. Sorry, guys. "He was very brave, wasn't he?" Hermione said, leaning forward to watch Crumb land, and the swarm of Medi-Wizards blasting a path through the battling leprechauns and Vila to get to him. "He looks a terrible mess." Harry put his omnioculars to his eyes again. It was hard to see what was happening below, because leprechauns were zooming delightedly all over the pitch. But he could just make out Crumb, surrounded by Medi-Wizards. He looked suddenly... He looked... Sorry. He looked surlier than ever and refused to let them mop him up. His teammates were around him, shaking their heads and looking dejected. A short way away, the Irish players were dancing gleefully in a shower of gold descending from their mascots. Flags were waving all over the stadium. The Irish national anthem blared from all sides. The Vila were shrinking back into their usual beautiful selves now, though looking dispirited and forlorn. "Well, we fought bravely," said a gloomy voice behind Harry. He looked around, and it was the Bulgarian Minister for Magic. "You can speak English!" said Fudge, sounding outraged, "and you've been letting me mime everything all day." Well, it was very funny," said the Bulgarian Minister, shrugging. "And as the Irish team perform a lap of honor, flanked by their mascots, the Quidditch World Cup itself is brought into the top box," roared Bagman. Harry's eyes were suddenly dazzled by the blinding white light, as the top box was magically illuminated so that everyone in the stands could see the inside. Squinting toward the entrance, he saw two panting wizards carrying into the box a vast golden cup, which they handed to Cornelius Fudge, who was still looking very disgruntled that he'd been using sign language all day for nothing. "Let's have a really loud hand for the gallant losers, Bulgaria!" Bagman shouted. And up the stairs and into the box came the 7 defeated Bulgarian players. The crowd below were applauding appreciatively. Harry could see thousands and thousands of omniocular lenses flashing and winking in their direction. One by one, the Bulgarians filed between rows of seats in the box, and Bagman called out the name of each as they shook hands with their own minister, and then with Fudge. Crumb, who was very last in line, looked a real mess. 2 black eyes were blooming spectacularly on his body and face. He was still holding the snitch. Harry noticed that he seemed much less coordinated on the ground. He was slightly duck-footed and distinctly round-shouldered. But when Crumb's name was announced, the whole stadium gave him a resounding, ear-splitting roar. And then came the Irish team. Aidan Lynch was being supported by Moran and Connolly, and the second crash seemed to have dazed him and his eyes looked strangely unfocused. But he grinned happily as Troy and Quigley lifted the cup into the air, and the crowd below thundered their approval. Harry's hands were numb with clapping. At last, when the Irish team had left the box to perform another lap of honor on their brooms, Aidan Lynch, on the back of Connolly's, clutching hard around his waist and still grinning in a bemused sort of way. Bagman pointed his wand at his throat and muttered, "Quietus." "They'll be talking about that one for years," he said hoarsely. "A really unexpected twist, that. Shame it couldn't have lasted longer. Ah, yes, I owe you. How much?" For Fred and George had just scrambled over the backs of their seats and were standing in front of Ludo Bagman with broad grins on their faces, their hands outstretched. So my question to you is, why do Fred and George have their hands outstretched, and why would Bagman owe them money? Please respond in the comments.